Welcome to the Myeloma Matters podcast, hosted by the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, focusing on patients' experiences with and perspectives on multiple myeloma topics that matter to anyone affected by this blood cancer. In today's podcast, we'll be discussing caregivers, the spouses, partners, family members, and friends who play such an important role in helping myeloma patients manage everything from healthcare visits to the activities of everyday living. Please note that every myeloma patient is unique. The information in this podcast is not intended to replace the services or advice of trained healthcare professionals. Please consult with your healthcare team or contact the MMRF Patient Navigation Center at 1-888-841-6673 if you have specific questions about your health. Also, if you'd like to support this podcast series, we'd love for you to leave a comment or review wherever you get your podcasts. Caregivers play a vital role in helping myeloma patients manage their disease, providing assistance with managing symptoms, coordinating healthcare, supporting dietary and exercise needs, helping with daily activities, and through it all, providing emotional support. Helping the patient navigate treatment options is a particularly important part of the caregiver's role. The fast-growing number of therapies available for multiple myeloma makes this part of the caregiver role especially challenging. In general, being a caregiver requires considerable personal sacrifice, potentially involving a commitment of many years. The emotional and physical toll can be difficult for some caregivers to bear. To provide a deeper look into what it means to be a myeloma patient caregiver, we are joined today by Ben Day and Vicky Avera, both of whom have taken on the caregiver role for a myeloma patient in their immediate family. One of the earliest and biggest hurdles a multiple myeloma caregiver faces is getting up to speed on what multiple myeloma is, what symptoms it produces, how it is treated, and what patients can expect at different stages of the treatment process. Vicky is the caregiver for her husband, Gary, who was diagnosed with multiple myeloma in 2020 after blood tests during a routine checkup revealed anemia. When Gary got the diagnosis, Vicky wanted to dive in and educate herself on everything right away.
I fall on the very extreme of wanting to know everything and plan and prepare as much as possible. As soon as we talked to the first multiple myeloma specialist, I was all over the internet at night after Gary would go to sleep and just researching and just trying to learn as much as I could.
For Ben, it was the options available for myeloma treatment and the need to make informed decisions about how to proceed with therapy that were particularly overwhelming. Ben is the caregiver to his husband, Mike, whose myeloma diagnosis was, like Gary's, the eventual result of a routine blood test that showed anemia.
We quickly realized no one was going to tell us the right thing to do anywhere. Everyone was going to be like, my opinion this, my opinion that. So I was like, we're going to have a bunch of decision tree moments here where we're going to have to decide stuff. So we had to educate ourselves about each particular decision.
For some myeloma patients, a clinical study is a good treatment option. In addition to providing hope for myeloma patients, clinical studies can be an important source of information and support for caregivers. Caregivers are an integral part of the healthcare team and play a crucial role in the myeloma management process. They ensure that the patient attends appointments, and they can also serve as another set of ears for information relayed during these healthcare visits. Ben not only ensured that Mike made it to his appointments, he attended them as well, which positioned him to serve as an effective sounding board for Mike.
Ben was extraordinarily supportive whenever I was going to, especially my early treatments. He was always there. When I was going to all of my doctor appointments, he was always at every one. And I think it's really important to have somebody in those appointments with you, because some of it's like Charlie Brown's teacher, like you don't really understand what they're saying. And so it was really important for us to debrief after those, early visits, or even, just visits in general, to say like, this is what I heard. And Ben could say, well, that's not really what I heard. And because of that, Ben has a relationship with both of my doctors.
Vicky did the same for Gary's appointments, even taking notes to help her research key details at home. Gary was diagnosed with a specific type of high-risk myeloma, and Vicky's efforts helped them make sense of what that meant for Gary's treatment.
Dr. Anderson did have the FISH test run, and it was determined that I have P17 deletion with a 1Q add.
I take a lot of notes, and then I go home and I go, what did he mean by this, So really, I hate to say it, but I just did Dr. Google to begin with, and was reading up on, I had to learn what chromosomes, how they were built. So then I figured out he was 17, and why was that important? Well, I read Dr. Anderson's notes because they had them in my chart. So, that's the kind of stuff I looked into.
Caregivers are in a good position to note symptoms and side effects and to be able to report them to the healthcare team. They are also able to ensure that the patient takes any prescribed medications in the correct dosages at the appropriate time. The caregiver also helps the patient optimize nutrition, self-care, sleep, and exercise. For Vicky, this latter point was particularly important, and she made sure Gary kept moving.
I noticed that he was saying, well, I'm going to get up and go walk. But then the day would go by and the walk hadn't happened. And so I just said, hey, Gary, I'm going to go for a walk with you. And so we started in the early morning hours getting up and going and walking. And that has been very helpful. And it was a great bonding time for Gary and I to go on those morning walks.
The caregiver also often takes the lead in providing emotional support, a point to which Ben can readily attest.
I tried to keep it like as much of normal as possible. So when you're sitting in the hospital room all day, every day, it's like you're not just talking about the hospital. You're talking about everything else that's going on. You're like having the regular conversation that you would have if you were at home.
Learning about multiple myeloma and its management not only empowers the caregiver to help the patient make decisions about his or her care, it can provide comfort during a difficult, stressful time. Additionally, caregivers often find that their newfound knowledge about multiple myeloma can help educate other people in the patient's life about what to expect. Vicky, for instance, found herself needing to explain why Gary's diagnosis sometimes limited how he could engage in social settings.
I've learned that people, they don't understand why his immune system is down and that he can't go into a small room and talk and hug them.
When you're a multiple myeloma patient caregiver, it can be easy to ignore your own well-being while focusing on the needs of the patient. But caring for yourself is important. It recharges you and enables you to provide steady, strong support to the patient. A key aspect of this is establishing and maintaining a strong support system for yourself. For Ben and Mike, enlisting friends and family to help share the responsibilities of such things as attending doctor visits helped Ben minimize the time he needed to take off from work.
And Mike has a lot of great friends. He had friends who would come out from New York and from New York primarily, but also LA would come out and sort of be with him for a period of time, and they sort of all rotated out. And then there were a couple of friends in LA that, there were the odd appointment here or there that I couldn't make, especially trips to Duarte every once in a while that I couldn't go on, that he would have someone go.
Being comfortable with receiving help can be a challenge, but Ben recognized quickly that accepting help was as beneficial to their friends as it was to Mike and him.
Our plan was just to always have somebody, and most of the time that was me, but the other friends picked it up easily in an amazing way. They all reached out and said, what can we do? It's take them up on that and say, here's what you can do. You can take Mike to this appointment. you can do this, you can do that, and like be specific about how they can actually help. And then most of the time people want to do that. They want to feel helpful.
Vicky was thankful that her children could offer support.
I have some wonderful adult children, and boy, they were all on Papa G and his diagnosis. And so they were constantly telling me things that, I should do with food and with water. So I really can give a lot of credit to my children for letting me go down that path.
Seeing to your own needs is an essential component of being an effective caregiver. Support groups provide an opportunity to meet and speak with other caregivers. It's also important to stay on top of your own health needs, including your mental and spiritual health. Vicky found support in a variety of places, and she cites her faith in God as a major source of strength that helped see her through tough times.
I am in different groups in Facebook with multiple myeloma people, but the one that I asked one of the groups, if you were a newly diagnosed patient, knowing what you know now, and if you were only able to do one thing, what would you change in your environment? And the number one change was stress. I rely on God. His spirit is within me, and he directs me, and he gives me the strength.
To the extent that it's possible, keeping to your routine in terms of work, relationships, and social activities, both with and without the patient, can help provide a sense of normalcy and keep you connected to others. Recognizing the importance of maintaining normalcy, Ben and Mike made sure to watch their favorite shows together.
So yeah, we watched Love Island and then talk about Love Island for 2 hours. That was so different than being like, how was treatment today? Do you need anything?
Vicky and Gary make sure to set aside bonding time, where myeloma isn't the focus.
Unfortunately, I think I'm more of a nurse Ratched, as Gary says, than his beautiful, wonderful wife. But at the same time, we're very open with each other, and we try to make time to be not nurse Ratched. And like we love to do Friday night movies. And so just setting up special times to do things that myeloma isn't even in the mindset, it really helps.
The hard work of being a caregiver and the challenges it entails have not been lost on Mike.
We walked past a conference room at a hospital, and outside there was a big sort of cardboard thing on a stand that said they were doing a sort of a forum or a talk. Then the title of the talk said, "Caregivers need care too." It's very true, and so as much as this is about me, it's also very much about Ben, as the caregiver. And I think it is very important for us as the patient to extend that grace and space for the caregiver.
To learn more about the roles, challenges, and rewards of being a multiple myeloma patient caregiver, let's now join our guests as they discuss their experiences and perspectives with the MMRF's Mary Derome.
Let's start with Vicky and Gary. So how quickly did you realize that finding and securing a myeloma specialist was the best first step to take in your case? And how easy or difficult was it to find a specialist?
It was easy for us, and we recognized right off the bat how much the myeloma specialist was needed. When Gary was diagnosed after his L1 collapsed, and we were in the emergency room, they came back and told us then that he had multiple myeloma. And so the oncologist that Gary had seen just briefly, like a month or so before, because things were not looking right, they didn't know what it was. She was suspecting multiple myeloma, but they didn't know. So we had been to that oncologist once, but when we found out we had multiple myeloma, our grown children, university, they had some friends that were in medical school. And so we got those connections and said, hey, would you please find out who they would recommend here in the DFW area. And so they did. They came back and gave us 3 names, and then Gary and I separately went off and researched each one ourselves, and then we both came up with the same person that we thought would be our first shot. And when I called to make the appointment, it was UT Southwestern's who we chose. So I called UT Southwestern and to set up an appointment with Dr. Larry Anderson. And the lady that was taking the appointment, she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but we will not be able to see you." I don't know. I think she said like 4 months out. And, so I was like, okay, he was our number one choice. To myself, I was thinking, okay, let me go to the phone and start with number 2. And I was about to hang up. And she said, "Oh, wait a minute. We have an opening," I'm going to say, I think it was Thursday or Monday. She said, "that just popped up. Somebody has canceled, new patient. Would you like it?" I was like, yes. He's been awesome. He speaks at a lot of these conferences, and everything he has had Gary on is, as we see through, our studies, is what the latest and greatest should be. So we're happy.
So Ben and Mike, so you guys ended up switching from where you received care. You were at UC San Francisco, and then you went to City of Hope. So what happened with that, and why did you feel like you needed to make that transition?
We didn't know much about City of Hope. For whatever reason, they didn't necessarily come up in our sort of first, list that we sort of put together. I can't really remember why we chose UCFS. I mean, I think we were there with Tom Martin. And just to be very clear, we had one initial meeting with Dr. Martin, and he was incredible. And I still will message him questions, and he'll still answer. So, there's a great relationship there. I have a local doctor in Santa Monica who's a hematologist. So he's not a myeloma specialist, but he specializes in all sort of hematological cancers and stuff. So he's incredibly knowledgeable and fantastic. But when it started to sort of just the coordinating of traveling and, while it's pretty easy to get from LA to San Francisco, I think it's a 45-minute flight or something. The first couple of times that it sort of came to actually planning the logistics, just with life and the anxieties of being newly diagnosed and, all of that stuff, I think it became clear that it would just be easier to find someone locally. And so we reached out to the MMRF and sort of had a conversation with them, and they sort of introduced us to City of Hope. And I think we had gone to a couple of myeloma conferences or, seminars or whatever. And locally, there were a number of different people talking about Amrita Krishnan. And there was specifically one woman who had a very, very difficult, severe disease that was super complicated. And she was talking about just how amazing Dr. Krishnan was. And I sort of, my ears perked up. And, I think that's how we sort of added her to the list as well. And so we went to City of Hope, and, we're incredibly happy there.
Good choices, both, I have to say.
I just remember when we were thinking about where to go, we were thinking we have fairly flexible jobs, and this was obviously our main focus. And so I remember we went to Little Rock, we went all over the place, and I remember us thinking we're going to get the best no matter what, and it doesn't matter where it is. But then shortly thereafter, a couple months later, and we're lucky because we live in Los Angeles where we have a bunch of options, but there was a little bit of an issue that Mike had right before his transplant. There were other things along the way that were sort of last-minute emergencies, and I do remember being very, very grateful that ultimately we chose a Los Angeles place. So and we have friends in LA who get treated other places, and I remember feeling, gosh, I am so happy we're not doing what they've done now, because Mike had this emergency, and we'd be in the emergency room with a new doctor, with people who did not understand what we were specifically going through. So we sort of stumbled into it, but just because you feel like you're going to a specialty somewhere else, it doesn't make it better. There is real life stuff about being close to home.
And I think that the point that you make is a very good one about, having some emergency happen and then ending up in the emergency room with a doctor who is totally unfamiliar, potentially totally unfamiliar with myeloma, and certainly unfamiliar with you guys as, Mike as a patient, and you as the caregiver, right? So I think that that's like a super, super good point, right? That it's good to have a care team that you trust, that is nearby. You guys are lucky that you happen to have, some choices near you. Not everybody is so lucky, unfortunately, but it's certainly something to consider. Let's talk about some of the biggest challenges with being a myeloma caregiver, like, the steep learning curve when you're trying to, figure out what is this disease and how are people treated, and, what should be our treatment plan, who should we be going to as a doctor, going through a stem cell transplant. And on the flip side, what has been the biggest help to you? So, like, is it like having a good team or having resources available?
Biggest challenge to begin with was just understanding what is this word multiple myeloma and what does it mean? And Gary his L1 had collapsed and he had a 4 vertebra spinal fusion, and here we were. So as a caregiver, you have to be there for them and you have to remain calm. While you're in the hospital, if you had started that way, you have to take copious notes and notice every medicine they're giving them and, just really stay on top of it. Try to get some sleep when you can. Then when you get home, you have to be the nurse too. And if you've never been a nurse, I'm a math major. So it's like you have to learn how to take their blood pressure, how to do their temp. What time do you call them if the temp goes above a certain number? What do I do on the weekends when the blood pressure bottoms out? Do you call 911? And there's a big learning curve there, but you do it. It just comes. When you need it, it's there.
Myeloma is incredibly complicated, right? So, I've been working in this field for 10 years, and I remember when I first started, it took me really 2 years to totally wrap my head around the disease, the treatments, and it's changing all the time, which is one of the things that I find most fascinating about myeloma is that there's always new treatments coming on board and new knowledge and things like that. So, while for me, it's super interesting to have all these happen, for patients and caregivers, it can be really daunting to try to keep up with all of that, especially if you're not people who have a research background or a medical background.
I would say that what I did was I was already on Twitter, which is X now, but I was already on it, so I knew the platform, and I immediately recognized that all these myeloma specialists and doctors, that was their platform. That's where they shared information. And so since I was a mathematician, I kind of understand math science, and so I understood their lingo. So I learned a lot just from that study on that platform to begin with. But then I, of course, signed up for MMRF and any organization I could think of that had to deal with multiple myeloma.
How about you guys, Ben and Mike? What is the biggest challenge about being a myeloma caregiver for you?
I think for me, Mike is definitely a researcher and a person who was going to get diagnosed and discover everything he possibly could about the disease. So it wasn't as if I felt like I had to be the primary knowledge center. What we quickly discovered was that myeloma, like you said, is very complicated. And I'm sure it's like this with a lot of diseases. I don't have a lot of experience with a ton of types of diseases, but it felt like with myeloma especially that we had to be active participants in deciding what our treatment centers or treatment plans were going to be. And it wasn't just going to be someone telling us. And so for me, I had two sort of targets. Looking back on it, I realized number one was I wanted to know enough and be present enough in all the appointments and just be physically there, but also the witness and hear everything that Mike heard. I wanted him to feel like I was part of it and that I could be helpful in making a decision so that it didn't feel like it all would end up on him. And I could only do that if I was actually there and I heard and I got to see the doctor and I got to understand how things were being laid out. And I, obviously with my own research and going through the MMRF and the Twitter, I think Twitter was super helpful for all of us. But then emotionally, like the other part of the being a caregiver beyond just the knowledge stuff, I think I was trying to just sort of be a source of calm. And part of that is understanding what's going on enough to be helpful in making decisions and feel confident in making those decisions. Like you kind of have to be the source, or I was trying to be. I don't know how effective I was, but if we made a choice that said I was trying to pretend like I was sort of sure or that I understood enough to be sure enough so that Mike could hopefully take some confidence in that. And I also just tried to be like a calm source. I tried to like find the right balance of understanding how enormous and sad and scary the diagnosis was, but also try to be a source of optimism and lessen anxiety. But you can only kind of do that if you dip in and understand it a little bit. So you kind of have to find the right target of not being unrealistic, but being realistic, but also trying to provide hope. And I also just tried to keep it light. And that was difficult sometimes. You know, you're in scary, serious situations and in tough conversations. And even when we go to conferences and see people in really scary situations or feel like, oh, that's going to be us in a little bit, and it all started to feel really true, I would just try to, not disrespectfully, but I would try to make jokes and just try to keep all of it light.
It's a really scary situation. Obvious. I mean, that's an obvious thing to say, but I think like I always like to speak to like younger patients too, because I was 38 when I was diagnosed and Ben was like 34, I think. Like we would leave these rooms and Ben and I would Ben said it like at one point, he's like, I look around and I'm like, where are the adults in the room? Like, and it's like all of a sudden we like realize we're like, oh shoot, like it's us. Like, you know, the doctors even look to you, you know, to sort of like kind of lead them in a lot of ways, you know? And so, you know, I don't want to speak for Ben as to like what was difficult, but I think that just generally like, you know, we really grew up throughout the process.
You know, I've heard that I think it can be a little bit more challenging when you're diagnosed earlier, and not only because maybe your disease is a little bit different than people who get it when they're like in their 60s or 70s, but also it's hard to sort of find that relationship because like that's not really your demographic, right? You're much younger than a lot of people who have been diagnosed, and it sometimes can be hard to come across somebody who can act as a resource and really understand what you guys are going through, right, at a much younger age compared to people who are like maybe having their kids take care of them or something like that, right? So it can be very different. So I'm, you know, thinking about like resources and things like that, Ben, as a caregiver. So what are some of the resources that you have or that you rely on to give you help and support when you feel like you need something?
I think it was most impactful for me not to feel like I had somebody else I could dump on, but I didn't want to, you kind of have to have an outlet yourself, right? So, and Mike couldn't be that person. So I remember having really hard conversations with my parents, with my friends, with other people in our life who know our situation very well. And in those conversations, I was able to probably be, you know, really address some of my scarier fears and some of the things that I didn't think would be helpful to talk with Mike about. So that was a resource to me, an outlet, people to talk to, people to sort of engage with. I think Twitter truly is a fantastic source. I would go on there. You can, you know, the thing about the internet that we all know is you can kind of find whatever you want. So sometimes when you want to find the bad news and like really address it, you can find that. And then sometimes when you want to feel hope and all that, you can find that too. And so I would certainly do that. And then I think just the MMRF in general, or having somebody that you felt like was sort of in the fight with you, that you could rely on and ask questions to, and just, it sounds corny, but just to know that they were there, like that stuff is really meaningful. And then at the hospital, I also found when we were actually there for the transplant and for some of the actual procedures, I found that being there all the time or as much as you possibly can and sort of getting to know the nurses yourself as the caregiver and getting to know the people who were caring for Mike allowed me to sort of have conversations with them outside of Mike or allowed me to be part of the process. And that was really helpful to me.
I can see how that would be, you know, it would be very sort of calming, right? That you could have these conversations with other people and just sort of like offload your anxiety, you know, on someone other than Mike who didn't really need any more anxiety.
I feel like I'm sure that they deal with a lot of people who are with their patients who kind of flit in, flit out. There is something I think that you kind of have to earn their respect or like earn their through consistency and by asking smart questions and by being curious. You kind of have to let them know that you're in this too, and they'll treat you differently than they might somebody who flits in or out or is uninformed.
I totally agree, right? And so definitely if you're talking to the care team and the questions that you ask them come across as being educated and informed, then they will realize that when they answer you, they need to give you an educated and informed answer, which means that you're going to get more information anyway, right? So, which is a good thing, I guess. Okay, so Vicki and Gary, how about the resources that you have relied on for help and support over the course of this journey?
Well, for me, I relied on my family, my sisters, and also Gary's family, his sister and mother. They were first, and then we're very tight with our Bible study group, and so they were on top of it with. And I just set up a text message to everybody to begin with, so I could tell everybody at one time what was going on. With Gary's multiple myeloma, it was kind of a horrific beginning, with the backbreaking, whereas other people with myeloma get the chance of just being diagnosed and with the blood, and they can be smoldering or MGUS. But no, we went into double hit, high risk multiple myeloma from the get-go. And so those two, and then I actually went on Facebook and started a Praying for Gary Aver group, and I would post out there, and we felt the prayers of all those people, and so that was a lot of the emotional support that Gary and I both had. I set it up, but then Gary, when your back is broke, there's not much you can do, and he got so much out of everybody reaching out to him, and they would call him on the phone. I loved every one of those people when they would call him. And his bosses, he worked at T-Mobile. T-Mobile was just amazing, and they would call him, and so we had really good resources. And then of course our children. We have 2 children, adult children, but they were supposed to come to our house for Christmas. Gary was diagnosed December the 14th, and it was our year to have Christmas. Well, they just, even though I'm capable, and I know we are older than Mike and Ben, but the children, it's just like we all bonded so well, and it has stayed to this day, and they just love their Papa G.
Yeah, so, and then from a technical standpoint, the kids did do a lot of research for us, and then, of course, looking on the internet, and then they researched foods and how to improve nutrition and, for a cancer patient and everything. So they did a great job with that. Vicki did a wonderful job researching everything from, who were the best doctors, what were they saying, what were the clinical trials, MMRF, and other entities, had that information available. And then, even though it was a high risk, double hit, high risk, and it was like, okay, there's a whole nother level of research that needed to go on. And then, getting all that information. And we found it with Dr. Anderson, he was really fantastic at answering questions. I've never met a doctor ever, even the ones I personally know, that would answer questions so quickly and so thoroughly, and then, we just find out later through research everything that he said so far has been correct.
Speaking from somebody who's in the myeloma community, and I know almost all of the myeloma specialists in the U.S. because, I travel around and see people at meetings, and we have them come to our education events and things like that, and they are, every single one of them is so dedicated to their patients, right? And certainly Larry is a great example of that, and Amrita as well, right? So they're very, very attentive to patients, happy to answer questions, very dedicated to the work that they do, and many of them are involved in clinical trials, which is so super important for patients, like to get to move forward to the next therapy once things are sort of taking a turn for the worse. So let's talk about how easy or hard it is to be a caregiver. So, I'm sure that you must have good days and bad days, but Ben, does it ever get easy? So for example, Mike is undergoing treatments, and maybe there's a response obtained to the treatment, like after stem cell or something like that. And so do you get to a point sometimes when you actually can enjoy life maybe a little bit better without these routine appointments with the doctor and therapies and side effects and stuff, interfering with, just your quality of life?
Yeah, for sure. Recently, for instance, Mike made the decision to stop taking Revlimid or maintenance therapy after, 4.5 years, basically. I've noticed a difference in him in that, being off of that for a couple of months, and his general energy levels and sort of mood. And so that's sort of fun to see. But earlier in the process, when Mike would be on Dex and be on steroids, and that, you know, those days would be hard, and he would talk a lot and sort of drive everyone crazy. So I remember some days were harder than others. Mike and I were talking about this the other day because we knew that we were to be talking about this, and part of us were like, gosh, it's kind of hard to remember some of the specifics, and it's not like it was all that long ago. We kind of thought about maybe it's a little bit like childbirth, where it's like painful, but then your body just kind of like knows to forget how painful it was, and you kind of move on. Because we look back and I'm like, it wasn't that bad, but I remember being in it. It was very, very scary. And there would be times when you felt very, very dark, but then there'd be little wins along the way, or, you know, you'd have a funny nurse, or you'd have a bad meal, or you'd have a good meal. Mike and I, when we were going back and forth to our rental house out by City of Hope during the transplant procedure, we got obsessed with Love Island, and every night we'd look forward to Love Island, and like that's what kept me going through the day. Is like we were gonna have a new episode that night, and things like that are silly, but were able to sort of keep us going. And I also just tried to just be very grateful all the time, because we would meet other people who were not in our same situation, and my job was so flexible with me to allow me to spend so much time with him. So even when it was hard, I would try to, not to be too corny, but I would try to sort of lean into the gratitude of, you know, oh my gosh, this appointment just got rescheduled. I'm so happy or I'm so grateful that I don't have to miss this because my work situation was tough and I wouldn't be able to get that time off at the last minute or whatever it was. So I tried to just remain grateful. But yeah, you kind of have to like celebrate the wins and like sit in the bad for a little bit and then try to keep it moving. That was my process.
Did you sort of feel that same way, Vicki, that there's like the good times and the bad times?
Absolutely. You're going to have your good days and your bad days, and it goes along. You learn the medications and what they're going to do. Like Ben mentioned, the Dex, and then Gary's on daratumumab, which lowers the red blood cell count, and then he's on Revlimid, and Ben and Mike, you know about Revlimid. And then Gary, to start with, was on Velcade. So, you know, it's just a roller coaster. And I think Gary's primary care physician at the very beginning, when all this happened, he told Gary, it's going to be a roller coaster. You're going to have your good days and your bad days.
So Ben and Vicki, do you still feel like that you need to continually educate yourself about the disease? So Ben, do you talk to Mike, and Vicki, you talk to Gary about maybe going on a clinical trial, if that might be, you know, a good option for you depending on where you are in your disease course?
Yes, I feel like I should educate myself constantly. Now, I got to be honest, we're on the end of year 3 with multiple myeloma. So the very first year, I was just spending every second of my time when I wasn't cooking or caring for Gary. I was trying to learn more. You just have to. Nobody can do that for you. You just have to get in there, figure it out. And but now, year 2, things started getting better. Now year 3, Gary's in maintenance mode. Mike and Ben, he's in maintenance mode, but he still takes 3 out of the 4 of the medicines because he's the double hit high risk. And he's never reached MRD negativity, but it's stable by the Dr. Anderson is doing a great job of keeping myeloma under control. Anyway, this last year I've kind of laxed off, I'm like, and there's been so many things that have been announced. I've got a guilt inside of me going on, to be quite honest. I've got to get in there and understand things so I'll know what, I'll be ahead of the curve when he does relapse, so they'll know what to do next.
Exactly. So, but I mean, it sounds like he's doing pretty good right now. Right. And the fact that he is, a high risk patient means that there's many patients that I've talked to recently. I think that patients coming off maintenance therapy is becoming a thing now. People are on it for a couple of years, 3 years, as long as they stay MRD negative, they request it from their care teams, and it's happening, right? But you have to be a little bit more careful about that when you're a high-risk patient. So, but not to say that Gary will never get there. He may get there at some point, right, where he'll be able to get off maintenance, especially if he does something really fun like a CAR T, which is like a one and done type of thing, right? So that might be in your future, Gary. You never know.
I don't think you need to feel that guilt, honestly, because when he was diagnosed, I bet you figured it out very quickly and you're working on it. And like your life is affected enough by it. You don't need to spend every day doing that, as my feeling. Cause I know, I certainly don't. Mike knows. But I do know that if we were to come up, when we made the choice to go off of Revlimid, that wasn't something that we took lightly or that we didn't research or ask our doctor about and have real conversations and do all of that. So I felt like my course now is, and I think Mike does a version of this. I don't think he's every day trolling on Twitter like we used to. But like, we'll know about it when we need to know about it, and for now, we're just kind of trying to live life. And we'll be quick studies like we were last time if something comes up. I don't think we're missing anything.
Twitter, I always tell people when I was first diagnosed, I made 2 Twitter accounts. I had my own personal one where I would keep up with like dumb interests and gossip and stupid things that I just like generally enjoy. And then I sort of like separated out everything, like all of my myeloma stuff to a separate myeloma Twitter, just so I could really focus and be in that mode when I wanted to or needed to. And there was doctors and caregivers and patients and organizations and like everybody. I rarely look at that Twitter now. And so like Vicky, I would say similar to Ben, like I think that part of this journey is knowing when to sort of like step back and come back in and step back and come back in, because I do think that it's like incredibly important to not have this take over your life because it's so easy to, and then you can get sucked into the fear of it and the things and the this. And, I remember this pressure that I put on myself to understand everything as if I were a doctor and went to med school and all of those things, and to all the patients and like caregivers and just everybody that hasn't gone to med school, isn't a doctor, like take that pressure off of yourself. Like, there are some people that can pick it up quickly. There are some people that never will, but like, it's really about who you surround yourself with to sort of like help you understand. And some things you'll pick up quickly. Some things you don't even need to understand. It's just good to have an awareness of. And, so I do think that there's like an ebb and a flow of how much Ben and I are in it. And like he said, like I just recently came off of maintenance, and that was a huge decision. And one that I sort of agonized over, and I went back on Twitter and I started DMing doctors and, all of the things. But yeah, I think that it's just important to kind of allow your life to come back, and do the things that you enjoy, because that's really gonna be what gets both parties through, the patient and the caregiver.
Mike and Ben, y'all are so right. And I want to say that on Facebook, I'm in part of a Beating Multiple Myeloma with Naturopathic Methods, but I just do that just to see what foods and stuff like that. But I asked the group, I was like, if you only could make one choice, knowing now what you knew then, what would it be? You could only do one thing, what would it be? And I thought they were going to say food or no sugar or, pure water and stuff like that. You know what the number one answer was? Just what you 2 guys just said. It's stress. And so that is one thing as a caregiver now with Gary, I'm trying to do more of, is for us to be not as stressed out about things. And we have made a habit now of going out and walking every day. It is so enjoyable just to get out into nature, into the weather, and people in our neighborhood, they'll stop and talk to us. And, it's really great to have that stress gone.
By the way, Mike and I do that every day when we walk our dogs. And that's the classic story that we tell, because one walk, it normally takes about 20 or 30 minutes. Mike was like one of the first times he was on steroids, and he took Dex, and we walked out the door. And from the time we walked out the door until the time we got back, which was 30 minutes, I did not say a single word. And it was just a monologue of him just like fast talking at me about nothing. And we're like, oh, that's what steroids are. We just experienced it for the first time.
Gary jokes and says, I've learned when his Dex days are to put my honey-do list out, because that's when he has a lot of energy. He stays up, so I get a lot done.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit without getting like too incredibly personal about like relationships, right? So both of you are like, you got a patient, and then your partner is the caregiver. So how does that dynamic sort of work, right? And how do you maintain your relationship without it being like feeling like it's a nurse and a patient as opposed to being partners in life, right? So I don't know, Ben, how do you guys deal with that?
I think it's about trying to focus on I mean, not to go back to the Love Island example, but I think it was actually kind of focusing on something other than the disease, right? And trying to find ways to do that, right? We would, and I think we still do it, obviously, because we don't talk about myeloma every day, certainly, or every week. But I think focusing, even when you're like at the most intense about going through treatment or in the scariest moments, to talk about other things and to stay involved in your friends' lives and each other's life and work and things that are out there in pop culture or whatever you care about, sports, whatever it is, like you just can't talk about myeloma all the time, or else that's the dynamic, or then you'll be nurse and patient, right? You got to have some of the things that you used to, even if it's just talking about them, because you can't go to dinner or you can't go to a movie or you can't go to a game. We spent a lot of time thinking about what we were going to watch because there was so much time when we were just in the hospital in bed. So it's like, okay, how do we find something? How do we find a show or a movie or a book or something that we can watch and talk about or get into a different world? So for us, I don't know, Mike, do you agree with that? That's kind of how I thought we did it. It's just like having some other life.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think like we're in a very sort of like great time in our life, but also odd time to be diagnosed. Like we had just gotten engaged. Like we were like, I think we were engaged for like 2 or 3 months or something crazy. So for me, I was like really nervous. I mean, I was just nervous. It was like, oh, I felt like, here I am, just sort of this like invalid, like that Ben's now stuck with in a way. Like there was so much guilt, I think, on my part. And it's not what like, you sign up for when you're just getting married, but I think it also is, to a certain extent. But, so we were like navigating that. And I think for me, like a big part of it is like, I also just had to sort of like release a little bit of the control, which is very hard for me, and just allow Ben to be there for me and know that like he wanted to, and sort of like wanted to support me and wanted to figure out ways to be there for me. And just sort of like allow that love in, as sort of like cheesy as that sort of sounds. I think it's really true. And recognize that, it is more than a nurse patient relationship. Like there's so much more to it than that. But yeah, I think like, it was also sort of like we tried to continue our life as best as we could, and I was lucky that I didn't have any sort of skeletal involvement. So, I was able to, go to work and keep up my life that way. And we were able to travel. We went to Hawaii and Japan, like in the midst of it, because I was just sort of like stubborn and wanted to do it, even though there are parts of those trips that were incredibly difficult. Ultimately, I think happy we did it, but I think it was just sort of keeping up with our lives.
I also think it takes effort, and then I'll be done, but it does take effort to not be a resentful caretaker or a sort of demanding patient, right? Like you can have your moments and everyone can have a sad, sorry for yourself moment, but also you have to like, I remember I had to check myself a couple times, be like, oh no, you're like going to complain about having to be in the hospital right now. Mike's in the bed, you can go leave, right? And I'm sure Mike probably had moments where he felt like, woe is me, and wanted to be a brat or wanted to be demanding or wanted to be any of those things. It's like, you still have to remember that you're like a person and that you want to be the best possible version of that. And so it's like, it's not, a diagnosis is not like a get out of jail free card for bad behavior. And being a caretaker, you can't be a jerk to your patient or show that you're resentful or show that you're having a hard time or show that you're upset about it all the time. It takes effort. You have to like make the choice to do it in a respectful, loving way.
And I think as a patient, it's like it's relying on that larger network around you, not just one person. I think it's really, it would have been really unfair of me to only rely on Ben, And so while he's my caretaker, primary caretaker, I guess you could say, I think that we were really blessed and lucky to have sort of a village of people around us, whether that be friends or family. And, you know, I was still in my transplant, and there was a huge work opportunity for Ben to go to London. And it was really important for me to say, go, like, please don't like worry about me, like, please go do this. And my parents came in and, you know, sort of like took the baton from him. So I would think it was just really important to have an awareness of that.
How about you guys, Vicky and Gary? How do you keep your relationship semi-normal in the face of this diagnosis?
One of the things that we've done, and we did even when the kids got older, we had date night. And then, of course, with COVID and everything, we couldn't go out. But what we have done is maintain movie night. And then we each pick a movie, you know, of our choice. And then we alternate that. Or then we will, you know, occasionally order special food and have it brought in and things like that, and just kind of make it a date night as best as we can. So, or schedule time for the spa or the pool or whatever. So that thing. So that has really helped. And Vicky has pushed to maintain it sometimes when I was like a little bit blah. She said, "Nah, let's do this," and it's been good. So
I think that us doing, you know, Gary and I have been married over 40 years, and we're older, but at the same time, it just helped like to take your mind off of that word multiple myeloma. And so Friday movie nights, you know, that we look forward to it. I mean, it's like we don't do movies every night. Nope, Friday is movie night. We get involved in a lot of series. We stay isolated a lot. Now, I know a lot of multiple myeloma patients don't, but we just, with the RSV and COVID and flu and colds, and, you know, we just kind of avoid being around people a lot. So we have really enjoyed all of the TV series that you can get involved in. And sometimes we'll watch 3 or 4 at one time, and we really like that. We have a miniature schnauzer that we had just got as a puppy 3-4 months before Gary was diagnosed. So I had just got her trained, and she has been so wonderful for us as well. You know, staying inside, she's just a wonderful dog. She was a gift as well. We asked our financial manager, because we really weren't expecting on retiring and being disabled this quick, as soon in life. But, you know, we asked him, we said, can we put a pool in? So he said, yeah, you can do that. And so we've really enjoyed that too. Like Ben said, you find ways to not talk about myeloma into happy ways. And we love to eat. Now, I'm into organic foods. I do believe that you can help your immune system by doing that. And so I do a lot of the cooking, so it's really nice for me when we do order out. I look forward to that.
So tell me some other ways, Vicky, that you, you know, because it's really important for the caregiver to take care of not only the person that they're caring for, but also take care of themselves. So what are the kinds of things that you do to, like, you know, try to take care of yourself and make sure that you're prepared for whatever challenges might, you know, come your way?
So to take care of myself, I'm just going to talk about this year. The 3rd year into it, I realized that, you know, I've got to be happy and healthy in order for Gary to be happy and healthy. And my son got me interested in podcast. And so I have started taking a step back, and I do like a stretching routine every day. And I listen to these podcasts. And I've really learned so much, and I'm really enjoying that, how to sleep better. So I'm trying to do that. And then also Gary knows I decided I've got to have some me time. And so in the morning, and Gary's wonderful about this, you know, I have the door closed, and I'll do my meditation, my prayers, and play a little game. I'm a game kind of person, so I need that little time there. So it works. And Gary, he'll get away from me and that's how I'm taking it. And we do the walks. And what else am I doing, Gary? I'm really doing a lot right now. I'm about to get into resistance training. I know I need to do that. So I'm about to get into that. And I try to do like 3 times a week cardio, at least 30 minutes of cardio. So I have an Apple Fitness account, and I do the bike and do that.
So Ben, how do you take care of yourself? Like what's your self-care routine?
Yeah, I think Mike's laughing. I think over the last like 4 years or 5 years too, like Vicky, exercise is the biggest thing for me. I think that's the most important thing. And I found, a way that works for me. And that's sort of my own time with, actually, Mike and I often do that together, which is also maybe back to your other question about sort of how to do something separately and sort of feel productive together. That was something that we do a lot together. But I think also, Mike alluded to that work thing. I think for me, I still am pretty career focused. And so being able to go to work and Mike not making me feel guilty about working and allowing me that time and allowing me the ability to do that keeps me sane, because I still feel productive and I still feel like part of the world. And that has been helpful to me because I enjoy work, and I still, that's still a big focus of mine. So those two I think are good. And I think, I'm sure Vicky, you do this, just seeing friends, sometimes even when Mike was sort of in real treatment, going over and taking a break and seeing my friends, or having conversations with people, or even just like FaceTiming, but sort of trying to maintain the relationships that were not work relationships or not Mike, was also really helpful to me, I think.
Can I actually ask Vicky a question? I'm very curious about this, because from a caretaker standpoint, like, by the way, Ben's never heard me talk about this, so he's probably like mortified right now. But I think I've seen Ben take like better care of himself over the last couple of years than, I think at any point in our relationship. And I've been like really excited and proud of him for that. And I don't know, and Ben, obviously you should answer this too, but I don't know if that's a result of sort of like being a caretaker. Like, I don't know if that's sort of like taking care of, Gary, myself, were obviously in distress or in poor health. Does that sort of put a focus on your own health or your own wellness? Like, I don't know how active you were prior to this, but I was just curious. It just sort of popped in my head as something that might be a result of being a caretaker, maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, I realized, I even thought about this morning, that everything that I have done to help Gary and be a partner with him, not just caregiver, but friend and the love of my life, all of that I have done to help him in return has helped me, because I wasn't really wanting to go out and walk. But now I look forward to it. Gary's like, do you want to go walk with Maggie? I'm like, of course, let's go, let's do this. So, and then when I was doing the foods, I've lost weight now helping him because I'm trying to, stay away from sugar and be more mindful of the foods we eat and the exercise. Yes, everything is better for me because of the situation that was given to us. We didn't choose it, right?
Do you sort of see it in a way, Vicky and Ben, as a way of that being something that you can actually control, right? It's something that you can do for yourself that you can control versus what's happening with the myeloma, which is really something that's not really under your control.
There's just stuff you can't do, right? Like, so there are things, I work in a career that it would be drinks with colleagues or clients or something every night and work events. It's like Mike would allow me to work and do all that stuff, and I wanted to do all that stuff, but there's all the other stuff that I just wouldn't have been able to do and been a good caretaker. So you start eliminating that stuff, and then you're like, oh, I don't necessarily need to be out until late every night. And so then you're like, oh, then that's a healthier thing. And if you want to feel good, I think about, when Mike was getting his transplant, I was so focused on myself and not bringing illness to him and feeling good and feeling like I could bring. So, like, of course, you're just going to choose healthier options and you're going to be prepared. Like, you can't take care of someone else if you're taking care of yourself. And so you have to sort of be in a good position to care for others. So yeah, I think it only helps you make healthier decisions, or else you're just going to completely implode and be a terrible caregiver, right? It's like you have to make the choice.
All right, so I think we're pretty much up against the top of the hour here. So I just wanted to ask one more question of our caregivers. So really, if you think about it, and if you were talking, like if you went to a support group or you met up with somebody at the store, or one of your friends called you and said, oh, you know, my partner's been diagnosed with myeloma. Now what am I going to do? I have to be a caregiver. You know, if somebody approached you like that, what would be your like best piece of advice to that person sort of going into this?
My best piece of advice would be whatever you can do to not be resentful and lean towards gratitude that will be helpful to you, and to not, whatever you can do to not half step in, but fully step into it, because then that allows you to do everything else and it doesn't feel like you're taking away from it. It's like you have to just make the conscious decision to go all in, not be resentful, and think about the things that you have in your life that allow you to do that, or that you're grateful for, and that will allow you to have a positive attitude.
Vicki, what's your advice?
I would say just put one foot in front of the other. Take one step at a time. It's not something that you'll be able to achieve overnight. And don't get discouraged. You can do it. Just take one step at a time.
So that was an excellent conversation. You guys have been so enlightening, and I think that what you've really sort of conveyed here, I think, is going to be so helpful to other patients and caregivers who listen to this podcast. So I'd like to thank Gary and Vicki, Avara and Ben Day and Mike Smith for sharing challenges and optimism in dealing with caring for a loved one with multiple myeloma. You guys just really have all these pearls of wisdom. It's just so amazing.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Myeloma Matters on being a multiple myeloma caregiver, hosted by the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. The MMRF thanks Ben Day, Mike Smith, and Gary and Vicki Avera for sharing their experiences and perspectives on being a caregiver for a loved one with myeloma. The MMRF would also like to thank AbbVie, Amgen, BMS, Cure, Genentech, GSK, Janssen, Karyopharm, Sanofi, and Takeda Oncology for their generous support of this podcast. If you have additional questions about what you heard today, please call the MMRF Patient Navigation Center at 1-888-841-6673. Finally, if you've enjoyed this series, be sure to leave a comment or review wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks for listening.